Hello, can you hear me? All right. All right, can you all see my screen? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, good. All right. Okay. Let's give a couple more minutes. All right, everybody. Welcome back. Let's see where we are. Yeah, so today we're going to wrap up talking about CSS. I mean, we are going to keep using CSS and HTML, but it is this couple of weeks we've only been talking about CSS and HTML, and then we're going to continue with the next topic of JavaScript next week. Or actually, perhaps we're going to get started today. Let's see, there's a question on the chat. Hello, pros, can you go over navbar? Only being hover over course navigation and remaining content excluding canvas navigation. Sure. Yeah, we can take a look at that. Yeah, so for the first module, for the first couple of weeks, we discussed HTML. It's a language that allows us to describe the rough content of a web page, right? And use some rough formatting like tables and headings and paragraphs. And then we said that we would come back later on and revisit that content, to make it a little more presentable. And we've been using CSS for the last couple of weeks, right, to be able to, describe the look and feel of that content. And we saw that it was fairly challenging, right, to make things look professional, right, that you need an artistic eye for that. And so we then enlisted the help of a library called Bootstrap that declares all sorts of very useful utility classes and widgets, right, that we can just copy the HTML document and the HTML and the CSS that goes along with that, right, and very easily apply some useful layouts, right, such as grids that we can split the content based on the size of the screen, right? That it can adapt to different sizes of the screen. That can hide and show portions of the screen, based on whether it's wide enough to fit everything, or it's too narrow to fit some columns, and we can hide those columns, right? But and today we're going to continue doing a little bit of that, but up to this point, all this content has been static, right? We haven't been able to create new content within the application, right? We see that the only way for us to modify the DOM has been to explicitly write the content on an HTML document and have it parsed by the browser. So today and next week and the next couple of weeks, we're going to be introducing the JavaScript language, right, as an alternative right, as a much better alternative to dynamically render content, right? So that instead of having this static HTML DOM elements that do not change over time, we can now respond to user inputs, right? To maybe to add content or remove content or update content, right? And eventually we will store all these changes as data structures that are stored in a database, right? So we can retrieve them later. But starting next week, we're gonna discuss how is it that we can represent an application in terms of a data structures, right? And then convert those data structure into user interfaces, right? So we'll introduce that notion today. Okay. So let's see where we left off with what we were working on earlier this week. Before then, let's just check the calendar here. So we did Q1. The answers to Q1, quiz 1, are available on Canvas. So go there, take a look at the quiz. I made a post on Piazza. Please reply to that post if you see something wrong that we should take a second look, maybe, or even if perhaps you misspelled something and and we can still give you partial credit for it. Or if you think there was something wrong with the question or the answer, please reply to that quiz 1 post, and the TAs and myself will go over that, right, and let you know. Okay. Also, quiz 2 will be in the second half of next week, right? And it'll be about CSS, right? So very similar to the first quiz, right? We're going to give you a code snippet, right? That's missing some variables or some piece is missing, right? And you have to fill in the blanks, right? So that the code does something, right? We'll probably give you some content, right? And we ask you, well, how do you make this bold? How do you make this border red, right? How do you make the foreground color blue? And so we'll give you something that's supposed to look like that, right? And then here's a code snippet, and then you have to modify the code snippet so that it does what it's described. Okay, so that's next week. Also the project is due. That it was moved from 12/4 to 12/10, right? And also the final exam for the undergraduates will be on the 12/15, right? So for us, for the graduate folks, it's going to be that week, right? So it's probably going to be available that Wednesday. So that would be what, the 12th maybe, right? And it'll be available for about 3 days. So check your due dates for the exam. And so it's set that same week, right? But for the undergraduates, it's a synchronous class. So it's that one day at that particular time. Whereas for the graduates, remote asynchronous, which is the ones that these classes, it's not a set day. It's not a set time, right? So it's within a range. And I believe I set it to that Tuesday or Wednesday of that week, right? And it's open for 3 or 4 days, I forget. All right. What else? I think that's it. Right. So let's see where we left off. What we were working on last time we met. So let's bring over the project, right? And let's start the server. Okay. And we have been discussing several Bootstrap components, right? Different widgets from Bootstrap that were useful, and in particular, we took a look at the card, right? widget that allowed us to implement something that looked like the dashboard, right? That looks something like this. So here's the original dashboard, right, by the actual canvas, right? That is behaving like what we have, right? That we have multiple columns, right? That they don't expand or shrink, right? They stay on the same width, and if they don't fit, then it just wraps, right, and continues in the next row, right? And that's what we were able to do here, right? That so we can narrow this, and then because it doesn't fit, right, it just wraps into the next row, right? We also discussed these cards as a means for navigation, right? That allows us to start at the beginning, that where we have a list of all the courses that we are related to, and then we can navigate right to a particular course. So, and there are many different ways of navigation. Certainly, we've been exploring these lists of hyperlinks, right? That you can click them and then navigate to different sections, right? These are also lists of navigations. We have these buttons, right, that also behave like navigation. And we saw that Bootstrap has, also it has tabs. It implements all sorts of navigational widgets, right? And we explored two of them, right? Well, three: the dashboard cards, right? The tabs, right, that you can click and then maybe navigate to a particular section. And also we looked at the nav bar that's stuck at the top, right? And let's see, the question on the chat says, I noticed that the final quiz time now on Canvas is from December 10th. Is this the finalized time for us? The final quiz. Let's see. You mean exam 2, right? Exam 2 starts, on December 10th, 11th to the 14th. You have the 10th to the 13th. I think 10 is 10 a Monday. December. Yeah, no, 11th is Monday. Yeah, so for it, okay, so it goes from 11 to what? To the 14th. So 11 to the 14th. Okay, so Monday to that Thursday. Right. So you have plenty of days to choose from when to take the final exam during those days. Yeah. Okay, so I believe somebody was asking a little more explanations about this nav bar at the top. Okay. And the nav bar at the top, if you look at the CSS, right, we can see. Let's put this down below, down here. We can see that here's a nav bar, right? And what happened here is that the fixed top class that we added last added this position fix. That is what is causing it to be stuck at the top, right? That if you remove the position fix, it goes back to where it would normally be at. And I don't know if you could see, it's like very, very light gray. Very, very light gray. So let me change a little bit of the background. Where is the color? Well, let me change it here. It's this one, right? This nav right there. So let's change the background color, right? It's set over here. So I'm going to say background color. I'm going to change it to something a little bit darker. Gold. Oh, it's not overriding it. Why? Important. There we go. Important kind of like overrides everything. Well, not everything, but so there it is. So there's the where it would normally go is here, right? That's where we dropped it in our HTML, right? So if we go to our dashboard, oh, where do we put this? This is lectures. So let's go to lectures, Bootstrap, and here it is, right? So here's where we dropped our nav bar. There it is. There's our nav bar right there. And we put it right under this nav bar over here, right? That's where it's rendering normally. And by putting if we say, for instance, the position, right, is absolute, right? If we say absolute, okay, it puts it wherever you have the top, right, left is, but notice that it scrolls with the screen. See that? It scrolls with the screen. So it's relative to the current document, right, that's been loaded, right? And if you remember, a position can cause the fact that things start to overlap on top of each other, right? You worked on that in the assignments, right? In one of the assignments, in the CSS assignment, you were asked to implement a few HTML divs, right, that ended up overlapping each other, right? That's why box file dimensions position, right? So you did a relative that just nudged you from where you would normally fall, and that already causes something that overlaps something else, right? We saw that absolute moved you not from your point of view, but from your parents. Okay? And then there is we looked at fixed, and fixed kind of like put you somewhere, and you didn't move after you were fixed, right? Everything would scroll, and that would certainly cause that things to overlap over other things, right? That's why we introduced the z-index. The z-index can now that things are overlapping, you have a third dimension, right? Of what is the depth of your element? Meaning something can be behind other things, right? And you can control who is behind what. So when you remove things, when you have the regular position, things are the height and the width of that element is used to calculate how it affects other elements. For instance, because it's here, right? Here's the nav bar. Notice that it's right above the tab. See that? So because it's above it, it's pushing the tabs down, right? It's creating vertical spacing, right? And it pushes the tab down. But when you set the position to absolute, it's absolute. What it does is that because now you can put it anywhere on the screen, it makes no sense anymore, right? For it to affect, since this now can appear anywhere you want on the screen, because you can change the top, the left, top, the bottom, the right. You can position it exactly where you want it. It's no longer a relative position. It's not relative to the document location, right, where it's declared, right? So it no longer pushes the tabs down, right? Notice that indeed there's no space now between the tabs and the nav, right? There's no space between the nav bar here and the H2 here, the tabs, right? Because this nav has been put into position absolute, so it no longer pushes things down. So what ended up happening is that now this is what ended up happening, right? That because the nav bar was being put at 0 at the top, with this top 0 like that, right? Notice if I put it a little lower, I can put it wherever I want, right? But because it's floating around, right, it's not pushing anyone into position. It's not making any vertical spacing. Everything else is being rendered as it didn't exist. Okay, so when this ended up being 0, it ended up overlapping, right, that bootstrap heading. So to fix that, what we did is that we added this class here that we created, that added a margin at the top, right, that would bring down the whole document to compensate for this overlap, right? So then we brought in this margin, and then everything was pushed down. Okay. Now the difference between using fixed and absolute, they both put things exactly where you want them, but The difference is that absolute still scrolls with the screen, right? It still follows the scrolling, whereas fixed, right? Whereas fixed, so if you remove position absolute, right, and then you bring back fixed, this one doesn't scroll with the screen. You know, it just stays there and it's not affected by the scroll. That's the difference between the two, right? Does that make sense? How would we set the nav bar for canvas that bypass canvas navigation but apply for all the remaining content? How would we set the nav bar for canvas? I'm not sure what you mean. The nav bar for canvas. But apply for all the remaining content. Not sure what you mean, Jai. Are you saying that you also want the canvas navigation and the course navigation to be fixed in position? Is that what you mean? It does not. Oh, okay. You mean, is this what you mean, that as I scroll, this doesn't move? Is that what you mean? That this is not scrolling? This means that it's also using a fixed position, right?
Can you hear me?
Is that? Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, so I had a question. So the nav bar on top doesn't affect the canvas navigation on the left. It only hovers over the second div and then third div. So the course navigation and then the remaining content. And I try to set the nav bar after the first div in container, and it pushes down all the content all the way down, and like the aligning is not what I wanted. So I was wondering, how would I set a nav bar that only it bypassed the first canvas navigation on the left, but it's an absolute, I would say, yeah, it's a fixed nav bar for the remaining div. If we
Yeah, so for instance, let's yeah, so if we go here, like for instance, say we wanted to bring also the canvas navigation here, right? And it's scrolling like that, right? And the canvas navigation is on the right, and this navigation is only maybe on top of this, perhaps, right? So let's play around with that, right? So here we have the canvas navigation navigator. Let's bring that in. So we have here canvas navigation. We should be able to copy this, right? So let's copy that. And let's bring it into the dashboard. Oh, where do we implement the dashboard? Oh, I guess we implemented it in the lecture, I guess. We implemented it in the lecture. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so fixed stop margin. Okay, so for instance, we can bring in the dashboard. We can maybe make a div here, right? That had several columns, right? And maybe we could put the canvas navigator in that first column. And maybe this one can behave as flex, right? And then we have that one. We have the second one. It might be our dashboard, say. And this goes all the way down to, say, down here. Just contain the whole thing. Right, contain it right here, like that. And then we need to close, I think we need to close, which one's this? Is this, which div is this? Wait a minute, let me go up. Okay, so this is flex. This is the first one, right? Oh, okay, wait. Open that. And let me close that. And I don't need this. Okay, so this is the overall flex that contains the the canvas navigation, and then contains our exercise, right? And maybe you would have another div here, right? That would contain maybe the course navigator, right? So we could go to the course navigator, right? And copy the content there. And put it in the second column, so that if we load this now, let's see. So we have on the left side, we have the canvas navigation. Here's the course navigator, and then we have our dashboard. Okay. Deflex, maybe deflex. There we go. All right, so we have this deflex that creates this this horizontal. And I'm not sure if your question is, how would you make these also static, right? So that they don't scroll, or that perhaps this nav bar would only fit on top of the Bootstrap. Maybe maybe that's what you mean, and
Yes.
that the nav bar is here.
The nav bar in Canvas only hovers above the course navigation, so the canvas navigation does not get affected by the nav bar. If you see, there's a black on the left side. It's like a border on Canvas, and then the nav bar only starts.
Okay, so let's fix this one, right? So we can this one right here, we can make it a fixed, right? We can say so this one right here, this UL, right? This could be style, and we can make it position fixed, right? Oops, I'm mixing up languages. Position fixed. So that now it's and also the other one could be also fixed, right? This one, these two. Position fixed, right? So they're both fixed, okay? And now notice the Bootstrap, because it doesn't have the neither of those two pushing it, right? We need to compensate for the Bootstrap, right? We need to compensate for those two being fixed in position, right? So for instance, this is the canvas navigator, this is the course navigator, and this is the Bootstrap. So we need to compensate for the fact that they're no longer there pushing them to the side, right? So we can compensate by saying that we want to do a position, say relative, I guess. Relative. I guess you could do relative, where you want to push off of the left-hand side, maybe 200 pixels. I don't know if that's enough, right? So we're going to move it over to make space for those two navigation, right? So that this still scrolls, right? But these are not scrolling, right? And then obviously we can change the look and feel like this. We're saying override the styling, which I believe we had created for the canvas navigator, which I believe it's this CSS right there, right? So let's bring that in there. I think we can load that by saying link href from canvas, and then canvas navigation, and then index.css, right? Let's see. All right, so we have that black styling, right? That is not going to scroll with the rest of the content. And same with the home, right? I think we styled it. I don't remember. I think it's this one, no? So we should be able to bring that in as well, right? So let me just copy that. So it would be the courses, and then course navigation, I think. Okay, it's that styling. So we need to move it over a little bit. But again, because we have position fixed, we can put it wherever we want, right? So we could say, want to move it left, I don't know, 100 pixels. I don't know if that's enough. It would move it up. Maybe that's too much. Maybe, you know, you can play around with this, right? You can put it wherever it is. And this too, right? We probably want to move it over to the left. We probably have here position. We can say left. Let's see what's 0. Okay, so you know, so stuck all the way to the left-hand side, right? And this one's still scrolling. Now it could be that what you want is that this to be, you know, moved over a little bit. That's fine. We can totally do that, right? The navigation here, we can override the position. It's already fixed, right? It's already fixed. It already has a top 0 and a left 0, but we can override it. We can say, you know, left, maybe 100 pixels is enough, right? So notice that we can move it over, maybe 300 pixels. That's too much, right? So it's 200 pixels, maybe. So we can move it right on top of the Bootstrap, right? And then we can move these maybe to fit into that space, perhaps, right? Where these this could be go all the way to the top, right? Move it all the way to the top, and these two we can position it exactly where we want it, right? I'm not sure if this is what you were meaning.
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay. All right, exactly. So yeah, so with fixed position, you can do all sorts of things, right? That you can exactly put things where you want them to be, and whether you want to scroll them or not scroll them, or be relative to one another and whatnot, right? So yeah, so we basically cover most of what we need for playing around with Bootstrap. And I did want to introduce the fact that you know, we've been copying and pasting all this content, like for instance what I just did, right? I went out to the index.html that contained the code for the course navigation, and then I just pasted in wherever I needed it, right? And we have been you know, doing this for the last several weeks, right? And that there is no mechanism for being able to reuse content in HTML, right? There is a mechanism to reuse CSS, right? Because CSS provides, you know, a way of declaring code, style sheet code in a file, and then bringing it into whatever page I want to apply that, right? But there is no such equivalent in HTML, right? Other than perhaps maybe iframes. Iframes do allow you to, you know, create a little rectangle and say, well, fill it in with this HTML. I guess we could have done that, right? But those are really meant mostly for importing or, you know, creating little snippets of someone else's website, like an entire website, not necessarily for bringing together several snippets, right? Instead, yeah, for entire websites. Okay. So this is kind of hard coding positions, the best practice, layout different class. Well, yeah, that's the point where we're going, right? We want to have a mechanism, right? Ideally, that would allow us to create reusable components out of these, right? Ideally, we would be able to, you know, encapsulate this little code snippet and then import it, you know, just like we are linking CSS here. We would want to have the equivalent in HTML. Let's see the question in the chat. In case we use position fixed for canvas and course navigation, we don't really need to use columns from Bootstrap. Well, you still need you know, to resize depending on the size, right? Whether you want to lay them out in a particular way, maybe not necessarily for this assignment, right? But certainly it's there, right? The possibility of laying out multiple columns, you know, hide a few, show a few, right? And change from 6 to 4 to 2 columns. Certainly, you would need to use some kind of grid system, not necessarily bootstraps. So yeah, so we want to be able to reuse this code instead of having to copy and paste this all over the place, right? And the only way to do that is to use JavaScript, right? So today I'm going to introduce JavaScript to you, and and which is a good segue, right, from what we were exploring here in Bootstrap, right? In Bootstrap, we imported some JavaScript libraries, right, to make certain features work, right? We brought in the Bootstrap JavaScript, right, and we dropped it into the into our libs directory, right, where we put in our JavaScript in there. Okay, so we want to be able to write JavaScript like this, right, that allows us to interact with the browser. Okay, let's learn about that. Okay. So in the lecture, let's learn a few things. Let's create a JavaScript directory, and let's put here an index here. So index.html. Right, and here we have a full-blown HTML document, right? We have a head, right, and we have a body. Okay. So we'll create here. Let's bring in Bootstrap already. We'll do a link, and we'll bring in. Let's see. We can say lib bootstrap, and then bootstrap.min.css, right? And in here, maybe we'll do a little container. And we'll do an H1, welcome to JavaScript. Okay. All right, so let's navigate there. Lecture, and we'll go to JavaScript. There we go. Welcome to JavaScript. Yeah, so what can you do with JavaScript? Well, certainly the way we've been creating content, right, has been by typing these HTML documents, right? And that when the browser parses that, it generates this data structure, right? This is the data structure that it creates. So this is a tree, right? This is a hierarchical tree that has a node at the top, HTML, then the head, then the body, then divs, then paragraphs and whatnot, right? And right now, the only way to create this data structure is to manually type HTML text, right, into this file, right? Then the browser parses it and it creates this data structure. Okay. So we want to learn how to do this, but not manually. We want to do it programmatically instead, right? And so in the early 90s, Netscape came up with the JavaScript language, right, to be able to interact and control the browser, right, and in particular control this particular data structure, right, and that's where JavaScript has its fame, right? But it's it's a fully blown language that has matured over the years, for the decades, right, and now has a lot of very advanced features, very modern language features that you would normally find in any other language. But it has since evolved to run, right, and exist outside of the browser, right, where you don't have a DOM, right, where you don't have a user interface, right, so where you can write other programs that don't necessarily require a user interface, right? Something that you would maybe use Python for, right? Or are there any other scripting language or full-blown programming language, right? But for now, we're only going to focus on JavaScript running inside of the browser, right? So the way it works is that you can embed, right, inside anywhere in your HTML, typically in the head, right? Typically you put your scripts in the head, but really it can exist anywhere. Actually, much more recently, it's very common to put them at the bottom of your body. You put them right there, at the bottom of the body. So let's see how it works. So let's create them where they're supposed to go. They're supposed to be here in the in the head of the HTML document, and you introduce scripts, right, by using the script tag, and then now you can put code in here, executable code. So one of the simplest things is to use the alert function, right? That does exactly what you think it does, right? It pops up a little blurb alert, right? And then you can dismiss it. But one of the things to point out is notice that it is not rendering anything until I say okay. You see that? Meaning that the browser, as it's parsing this HTML document, right, it executes the JavaScript, and not until it's done executing that JavaScript, then it continues rendering the content, parsing the rest of the document. And so that is worrying, right? And that, if this script is blocking like that, you'll never see anything on the screen. Right? Or if it's something not blocking, but it's taking a long time to do whatever it is it's trying to do, right? You won't see the content until that script is done, right? Which that's why many folks, many developers don't put the script up here, right? Instead, they put them way at the bottom, right? And that so that if it's running, so this alert does the same thing. It still blocks the content. But if it's not blocking, but it's taking a long time, to download, it might be a large library, right, that you're downloading, and it would take a while before you would see any content on the screen, right? So that's why modern techniques usually will put the script at the bottom, especially if you're loading large libraries. Another reason to put it at the bottom is that oftentimes these scripts down here, they want to manipulate the content that was created earlier, right? And so there's an order dependency, right? That the script can't, if I put it at the top, right, it can't manipulate something that hasn't yet been parsed, hasn't yet been loaded into memory, right? So that's why we tend to put it at the bottom, so that we can guarantee that other content has already been loaded, right? And so I can go back and manipulate it at some point. Okay. So let's see, what can we do? What can we do? Well, you can. One of the things that you can do is you can pop up obviously things. You can also do console. You can write to the console, hello world, and the console is here. See that console? It's messages that the browser is spewing out, right? But here you can print to the console, right? So this is useful for debugging. You can also step through your code. So your code, you can see in sources, you can see the code that you have, right? So for instance, index, there's code in here. You can put breakpoints, right? You can put breakpoints so that if you reload, so it broke, it stopped there. If there are some variables or constants or looping or branches, you can step through the code, right? One line at a time, right? I don't have, okay, there it is, right? So you can, here's your stepper, right? You can go, one at a time. You can see your breakpoints. You see the call stack. You can see all the variables. So this is going to be an invaluable tool, right, for debugging your scripts, right? So before you come to TAs or myself, and and you can't figure out why it's not rendering as you expect, the expectations is that you have spent effort, right, at trying to figure out what's going on, using debuggers such as these. So it's a very, very powerful debugger, right? And so we absolutely expect you to be using it, right? And then you can continue, right? It's running, and it does what it's supposed to. Okay, everybody good? Yeah. So what else can you do? Well, you can instead of writing to the console or to the alert, right? Let's comment out the alert. You can actually write to the document, right? You can say document. So document, it's a global, right? This is a global object, a global object that represents this data structure, right? It is your one-stop shop, right? To be able to manipulate this data structure. You can change it, you can read from it, you can delete it, right? You can do everything, right? And so let's say example. So for instance, here you have hello world, or even HTML. You can say I want this to be a heading, right, like that. And there it is. So I stop there. Console, the console printed out in the console. Did it? Yeah, there we go. And you can continue, right? And it writes hello world. Yeah, that was dynamically added, right, to the document, right, programmatically. Yeah, I didn't add that. You can be more sophisticated, right? You can have maybe an array, right, where you have to-dos, right, to-dos, that an array of learn JavaScript, learn React, okay, so yeah, so it's an array of objects, okay? And then I can document. We can write a UL, right, and then I can iterate over for each, and I'm going to document write each one of them, and then close the UL, right? So there it is. So I can iterate over the array, and for each to-do object, right, I can write to the document, right, a new LI. So let's take out the breakpoint. Continue. So this list, right, was entirely created dynamically, right, looping through some data structure. And that's exactly what React.js is. React.js is a simple way, the simplest way, that it's a function. React.js is basically a function made up of multiple functions that transform, right, a data structure into some user interface. So basically here, right, this is an algorithm. This is an algorithm that is transforming this data structure, right, into some graphical user representation. And in our case, it's a list. Okay. So now, typically we don't write the code right inside of the HTML, right? Typically, we put it in a separate document, right? Just like you wouldn't use the style attribute or the style tag, right? Instead, you create a separate CSS file and you put the CSS there. Same thing here. We don't have the code here. Instead, we typically would put it inside of another file, maybe a JS file, right? And we can grab all our code, right? Remove it from here and paste it in here, right? And then we can reference through here. We can say that the source, right, it's the index file right there, right? If I refresh, it works just the same, right? Everybody good? And like like most like most languages, obviously you can use loops, right? Where, for instance, if you you can create a function, right? You can say function render to-dos, right? And the function takes as argument to-dos, and it does this, right? It iterates and renders that like that, and then you can just call that function and say render the to-dos, and it does the same thing. But now I can call it with multiple to-dos. I can say const to-dos, or I can to-dos two, two, right? I could maybe ID 1, right? And the text might be pick up the kids, right? Grocery shopping, do laundry, right? And then I can render again to do the second to do. I can list them as two different to do. So now we are introducing the notion that we can create reusable functions, right? That can generate content, right? And we can parameterize it, right? We can pass arguments. We can use basically or apply all the best practices, right, and skills that we have learned in all throughout our software engineering career, right? All the design patterns, right? All the great software engineering skills that we've been accumulating for a while. Okay, and that's what we are going to do. So one of the things that we want to do, right, is create components, right? Create components. So let's explore that. So let's see. Here's one way, right, of writing using .write. .write, basically it's parsing the content, right? It's writing to all this is writing to the DOM. All of this is writing to the DOM, right? And being added as DOM elements, nodes, right? And then this comes this script. It's a node that adds more nodes, right, from that script, and then it continues adding more content. Now you can also so this is as it's being parsed, it's generating content, but you can also modify content that already exists, right? So for instance, in this script here, right down here, I could, for instance, reference an element by their primary key. I say ID, this is the welcome message, right? And so in a script later, that has to be declared after, right? My AI is already guessing what I'm going to do. So it says you can grab a reference to an element in the DOM by their primary key, right? So this is a const the welcome, right? And then once you have a reference in a constant, for instance, here, you can then dereference it and use one of its attributes to update the content that was already there, right? So in this case, it says welcome to JavaScript, and I might change it to something welcome to web dev, right? Web development. So if I refresh, right, notice that H1 was for a millisecond, it was welcome to JavaScript, right? But then when it got to the script, that it updated the content, right? And then if you look at the DOM, right? Look at this, right? The DOM, right? The DOM is has been modified, right? Notice that it had originally been written into the DOM that it says welcome to JavaScript, but then came a JavaScript code down below that manipulated that H1, right, and replaced the inside to be something else. Okay. Well, that allows us to, opens up a huge door, right? A huge number of possibilities of what we can do, right? And let's see, a couple of other things. Starting from 2015, right, there was a huge jump in the feature set of the JavaScript language, right? A lot of really great features that, to be honest, should have been there all along, right? Were added, and it was a huge excitement that the language really had matured, right, and copied some really great stuff. So one of the main features that was added was the fact that you could you can have scripts that import other scripts, right? That you can control the namespaces, right, of scripts. It used to be that before 2015, if you loaded multiple scripts, they all lived in the same namespace, right? So it was very dangerous, right? Well, it was very error prone, right? That if you declared variables before or functions, that some other JavaScript could potentially override, right, or obfuscate, prior declarations of variables and functions and whatnot. With ES6, which is the version of JavaScript that came out in 2015, ES6, ECMAScript 6 version. The real name of JavaScript is ECMAScript, not JavaScript. So ES6 came out 2015, and it was a huge leap forward. And one of the main features was that now you can create namespaces, right? Where each file now had its own namespace. No more would you have variables that would declare in one file could override variables declared in another file. Instead, right, JavaScript, if you wanted to share content between files, you had to explicitly export variables or functions and whatnot, and then import them back from other files, right? Stuff that was obvious and common in many other languages, right? That did not exist in JavaScript until 2015. Well, I mean, there were other mechanisms that you can achieve that, like modules in Node.js and things like that. But in the browser, really modules came to be in ES6. Anyway, so let me demonstrate. So, for instance, you have this index, right? And an index, everything that was declared here is in global namespace. In global namespace. But if you turn on the feature that this is going to use the new and improved ES6 modules, right, and where you can import and have separate namespaces, you turn that on by using the type module, right? And oops, wait, am I using module? Yeah, okay. And modules, because it's now self-contained, right? Because it's self-contained, no longer do you have the same capabilities, right? You have to use, you can't use .write, right? Instead, right, you have to use like inner HTML instead, right? You do have access to the document, right? But no longer can you just in the flow just add stuff. So for instance, if you want to write some content, right? Notice that it is writing to the console, right? But instead of writing, you have to reference things. So for instance, this hello, right? Instead of writing, you need to reference elements in the DOM and then inject content in there, right? So for instance, you can have this h2 as a placeholder, right? It could be empty, and it could have an ID of hello, right? And right now it's not rendering anything because it's empty, it has nothing in it. But in here, you would grab the element, get element by ID. Wait a minute. Get element by ID, and I think I called it hello, right? And then you can say, inner HTML equals hello world, right? And there it is, right? So no longer you could just willy-nilly include code like that, right? You had to explicitly reference things, right? And then once you had a reference to it, then you could manipulate it, right? But the important part is that you can now break out JavaScript, right, into multiple modules that were not necessarily overlapping each other, right? So, for instance, you could declare libraries or other JavaScript modules. For instance, let's say math, right? And in here you could declare different functions. You could say functions add, for instance, something trivial, a comma b, right? And just returns a plus b, and then subtract, right? And function, whatever, just those two. And the way you would now use these, right, is that you would have to export them. You need to export them. So, for instance, one way to export them is to declare the export. You can say export, right? You can say export, and then from within your index.js, you could import them. You could say import, right? And your add, for instance, you can import the add individually. Just like what's module and what purpose again? Yeah, so before 2015, right, the keyword import didn't exist. There was no way of breaking out JavaScript modules. I mean, you could write multiple JavaScript modules, sure, but once you load them in using this script source, right? If you had variables that had the same name or functions that had the same name, they would override each other, right? So that was it was very hard to write very complex JavaScript code if there was no breaking in the namespace, right? Now for in your languages like Java and C#, right? Those are mature languages, right? That create namespaces, right? In JavaScript you say packages, right? Or in C# you say package, right? And within that package, any functions or classes, variables, right, are within the scope of the class, right? Are within the scope of the file, and they're not available outside of that file, right? Unless you explicitly, make it public, right? And then you include them. That how you would do it in C++, right? You would include these libraries, right? And yet you have to export them. So same thing here. So this didn't exist, but now they do exist, right? Now the feature of importing only is available if you turn on, if you say that this particular script is of type module, right? So because the browser needs to understand whether it's the old style pre-2015 JavaScript version, or if it's this new and improved JavaScript version, which allows you to do imports, right, and do all sorts of really powerful stuff. Okay, yeah. So anyway, so so we have these; they're exported, and now I can from within my index.js, I can now write out add 2 + 3, right, and in the console you have 5. There it is, right? Yeah, so you can write or you can write to the inner HTML, right? You can write subtract, or we can import also subtract, and the inner HTML is subtract, right? 5 and 2, so it's 3. Yes, right. So you can break it out into multiple components, right, or libraries. All right. So now all this capability, let's see what we can do, right? Let's revisit Canvas. So one of the problems that we were trying to solve, right, and going back here, is that in Canvas we had this Canvas navigator, this course navigator, being used in all sorts of places, right? So in my assignments, we had, again, the Canvas Navigator and the Course Navigator. In the grades, again, I had the Canvas Navigator and the Course Navigator again, right? And the way we implemented it was copy pasting, right? We were copying and pasting the content, and this created a huge, a debugging problem, right? If a huge maintenance problem. If ever we wanted to add a new hyperlink, a link to the Canvas Navigator, now we had to go and add it to everywhere where we had copied and pasted, right? So if we had copied and pasted into 10 different screens, well, we had to go and edit each one of them, right? Same thing for the Course Navigator. If we wanted to update, we had to go everywhere we had copied and pasted. So it's not a very scalable solution, right? Copying and pasting. And also, if you're a software engineer, if you're copying and pasting, right, there's a serious architectural flaw in your design, right? Something's wrong with your design. If you find in yourself that you have to copy and paste, right? You're always looking for ways of modularizing, encapsulating, right, and reusing content, your code and algorithms. So let's do if we can do the same thing here, right? Ideally, we would be able to somehow declare our Course Navigator only once, right here, right, and then wherever we wanted to render this, we could somehow import it and inject it in there, right? Just like we were doing with these links with your CSS, right? But we don't have that. Or do we? Let's see. Well, I just showed you a mechanism that we can render the content dynamically, right? Let me show you using JavaScript. Let's go back to our home. So let's implement these two, right, in such a way that we don't have to do the copying and pasting. How do we do that? Let's do it in the home first. So here's let's close this. Go home here, and here's the screen. And basically we have all this, right? We have here's the Canvas Navigator, right? Here we have the Course Navigator, right? And if we go to grades, we're going to find the same thing. The grades, we have the Canvas Navigator, we have the Course Navigator, right? So how can we use JavaScript to improve this? So the question is, are we allowed to use this approach? Absolutely. Yeah, if you understand this and you want to, you want to apply some of this, absolutely, go ahead. But absolutely not required, right? So I'm just going a little bit ahead here, right? So let's first do the home here, right? So what we're going to do is this, right? We're going to create from here. We're going to create a component. We're going to say copy paste, right? And we're going to convert this into a JavaScript component called home.js, right? So I'm going to follow the same naming convention here, right? So here's home, and so I'm going to strip out a few things here. I don't need this, right? And I don't need that either. Okay. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to wrap this whole thing in a string, as a string. See that? And then all of it, I'm going to wrap it inside of a parentheses, right? And this is going to be the return value of a function called home, right? That returns that string. Yes. And then I'm going to export it. I'm going to export this. I'm going to export. Default means that it's the only thing in this file that is being exported, right? And we'll talk about default exporting in a minute. So now going back to my screen, what I can do is I can just throw away all my content in here. Right? I can throw away all my content in there, and instead replace it with some div or some content that I can grab, right, by its ID, and say I call it root, right? Which is empty at first, and then I can grab the script that I just created. So script, it's I called it home JS, right? Oops, not JS. And it's a module. The type is module, right? Oh, I'm sorry. No, not source. No source. I'm sorry. We're gonna import it from here. We're gonna say import. So import home from home.js, right? And then I'm going to grab the HTML from home. I'm going to grab that root, right? And I'm going to change the inner HTML with that HTML that came back from home. See that? So that if I render this again, notice that I see exactly the same content. There's no difference, right? You can't tell that there's a difference, right? Before, it was hard-coded HTML that was in the HTML document. This time around, I have a string that contains all that content, and then I'm injecting it into that root div, right? If you look at the DOM, it's slightly different than before, right? Now there's a root DOM element that then contains everything, right? Contains everything. See that? This content here is being dynamically added, right? Using that string, right? Okay, so what? Right? So what? Well, I can now go to my canvas navigation, right? My canvas navigation. I can do something similar. I can grab the content, which is this. It's wait a minute, right? It's this one. No, is it this one? No, I think it's this HTML. This one right here, right? I'm going to copy this, and I guess we already had started playing around with the index, right? So let me rename this. So let's. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to rename this into index.js. Right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip out most of everything. I'm going to put this inside of a string, put this inside of a parentheses, put this and make this the return, right, of a function called canvas navigation, right? And close it here and export it. So export default canvas navigation. Actually, the naming convention is that this is called canvas navigation.js. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so the same name as the function that I have in there. So now that I have that, I can go back to my home, go back to my home screen, right, in my home.js, right? And I can import the canvas navigation. I can say import the canvas navigation, and the content that I had here that was rendering my canvas navigation, this UL, I can now replace this, right, with embed the function canvas navigation, and the content is going to be whatever that UL was. Right? So if I refresh, it didn't work. Wait, what? Oh yeah, I forgot this .js. Yeah, my IDE is assuming that because these are all JavaScript files that are importing each other, you don't really need the JavaScript. That's when you're using React.js. So my IDE is a little confused, right? It thinks I'm inside of React.js, which I'm not. This is just plain old JavaScript, right? So there it is. So my now here, right? My canvas navigation is entirely dynamic, right? It's being entirely rendered dynamic. Let's do the same for the course navigation, right? So the course navigation, I can do the same thing. It's this one right here. I can copy paste them and rename this to be course navigation, JavaScript. I'm going to strip out a few things from here. I'm going to grab this and make this a return. Is there a question on the chat? What if we want to change some of the canvas navigation? For example, the activation of each app. Yeah, we'll do that in a minute. We'll do our return, right? And then we do function is the course navigation, right? And then close this up and do an export like that. So now I can go back to my home screen, right? And also import the course navigation, and then replace my string in here, right, with my course navigation. There we go, like that. See that? And if I refresh, it looks exactly the same way, right? I can do the same thing in grades. We do need the around the string. Actually, my IDE is stripping them out. I actually would want them there. I think it makes it a little bit easier to read. But my IDE is stripping that out, right? Yeah, so parentheses would be fine, but my IDE is removing it, saying it's not necessary. I think it might make it easier to read with the parentheses. So anyway, so if I go back to my grades, I can do similar things, right? In HTML here, right? It looks like we started trying to do that, right? Where you have the screen here, and the screen, right? Let's bring in the those canvas navigation and those course navigation, right? Let's do that. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to make a grades JavaScript, right? And this is going to be, I'm going to strip out most of everything, right there, and I'm going to make this a string, make this a parentheses, make this a return, right, and make this a function, and call grades. Like that, right? And I'm going to export grades. So a question in the chat, what is the name of this approach? Component-based design? Yes, this is exactly what we're going to be doing with React.js next week, right? But the flaw in this approach is that we're still working with strings, and working with strings is very error-prone, and it's very easy to miss closing a tag, whatnot, and my IDE doesn't recognize it other than just a string, right? It doesn't even recognize it as HTML. When we get to React.js next week, it's going to look very, very similar to what we're doing today, but they're not going to be strings anymore. Instead, what React.js does is that it combines the two languages, the JavaScript language and the HTML language, and it makes it into one single language, and it calls it JSX, right? It's JavaScript mixed in with XML, right? And it allows you to blur the distinction between these two worlds, right? Between the JavaScript world, right, and the HTML world, right? You can seamlessly go back and forth without thinking about these being strings or not, right? And entirely thinking of these in component-based notion. Okay, that's next week, and I think it'll be very easy to go from what we're doing here, which is obvious what we're doing, right, into a little bit of more obscurity of how React.js does its own things internally. Okay, so here's grades. And now that you have grades, we can update the screen to not have any of this, and instead have a div of root. And my IDE, my AI is already knows what I want to do, right? It's importing grades, it's getting the HTML, it's getting the root, and it's populating it. Let's see if that works, actually. Let's go to grades. Yeah, grades still works. And I can, but now in grades, right, I can replace my canvas navigation. So I can say import my canvas navigation, right? I can import my course navigation. And so I can now replace my UL here with my canvas navigation, and I can replace my course navigation like that, right? And I refresh, and it didn't work. Did I miss something? Yeah, I forgot .js here. .js and .js. No, probably this is in the wrong place. This is supposed to be /canvas, and this is supposed to be /canvas, and then courses. Yeah, there we go. Right. So yeah, this is component-based technology, right? Component-based design. But as somebody was mentioning earlier, right? If I am in home, I like to highlight home, but when I'm in grades, I like to render grades. So what we could do is somehow pass as arguments, where are we? If we're in grades, right here in grades, I could maybe pass in that I want to highlight the grades section. But if I'm in the home, I might want to pass in the fact that I want to highlight home, okay? So we could go into function and then somehow render this dynamically, right? And highlight the correct one, right? We could say that the one that is active here, right? So also notice that, whatever, if you look at this UL, if you look at this UL, it's basically what, right? It's this, you have this outer UL, and this is just the same thing over and over and over. The only difference is that you have a different label here, and the URL is different. See that? We could automate this, right? We could automate this. We can create an array, right, of links that that has maybe the objects that contain the the names that we want to display here and the URLs. So you have a data structure, right, that represents the contents, right? And this allows you now to, for instance, do the following, right? You can now just iterate over this, right? My AI is already knows what I'm going to do, right? It takes the array of my links. I map over that array as I'm iterating over each object. It gives me each one of the objects, and for each object, I'm going to concatenate a string that represents an LI, a line item, where you have the name, embedded in the hyperlink, and then you have the class, right? Notice that the class here. Where's active? Yeah, the class active is applied, only if the link name is equal to the argument active, right? The parameter active, then it adds the active class. Otherwise, it doesn't, right? So yeah, if you refresh here, notice that now the top level here is dynamic. The bottom half is hard coded, right? So if I go to home, notice that home is highlighted, and here grades and home are highlighted. Whereas this down below is hard-coded, right? So I can just remove this hard-coded stuff, right? And we only keep the dynamic portion, see that? And it works just fine, it works. Notice that we only had to modify and edit a single file, right? A single file, but then that same file is being used in a whole bunch of different places, right? And I mean, that's the beauty of designing using classes and functions, right? And little components that then you reuse to build ever more complex things. Yes? That makes sense? Yeah, same thing for the, if you go to the, here in the canvas, right? You can do the same thing. In the, to implement this dynamically, right? You can have maybe an object, the links. So these are, links, constant links, and this would be an array. Let's see if my AI can figure this out. Okay, and so those are the names, right? You have the URLs. It doesn't seem to have picked up on the icons, right? So we kind of lost those. So maybe we can add here icons. So we have icons only for who? for the dashboard, so dashboard, right? So we can say icon, we can add icon. Is the, what do we use here? The tachometer, okay, good. It picked it up, very good. And for this one, for what was this? The calendar, right? So the calendar, also we have an icon. There we go. For the other ones, it didn't pick up. It didn't pick up an icon. But let's see if it can suggest an icon. Let's see. Icon. Okay, I left it empty. It got lazy. Can you suggest an icon? FA user maybe. How about for the home? Can you suggest an icon for the home? No, it's getting lazy. Is there an FA home maybe? I don't know. For messages, let's see if there's an icon for that. Envelope. Okay, yeah. So it got the gist that I wanted to suggest an icon, right? So we can create here now a code that will iterate over that, right? And for each, it's going to create a hyperlink. Yep. And presumably we need an active argument here. And based on that active argument, it's going to turn on that class. It's going to add a hyperlink with the URL plus the icon, right? The link name, close the LI, close the parentheses, close the join, right? And let's render that. Let's see if you refresh. Okay, there it is. Right? So it came out not bad. Right, we have accounts, dashboard, courses, right? A calendar and messages. Right, so we can just remove the bottom line items, right? So that there's no need for them. And so yeah, again, another example of transforming a data structure, right, into some user interface, right? And we have to provide what the algorithm is to convert some data structure, into the equivalent user interface, right? Now the canvas navigation in the home, the canvas navigation will be, I think, courses. So home, there it is, courses. Same thing if I'm in grades as well, right? In grades, this would be also courses, right? So whether I'm in home or in courses, the courses icon is highlight, right? But if I go to accounts, right, and edit profile, and I had here the canvas navigation, I would pass in as argument, account, right? And then it would highlight the account. Make sense? All right. Okay. What else? JavaScript. Blah, 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 okay. So yeah. So let's start looking at the assignment for next week, since we're already kind of already looking ahead. So next week, right? Next week, we're going to be learning everything about JavaScript, right? Or at least what we need to get by, right? The absolute minimum that you need to know about JavaScript and be dangerous, right? So same thing. We're going to implement some JavaScript labs first, just to learn about JavaScript, right? And we are going to be using this methodology of creating a root, right? An ID root. But in who's going to be filling in that div is going to be React. React is the one who's going to take the content, right, and feed it into this div with this ID. Okay, and so the way React does it, right, is that it uses plain JavaScript, right? But actually, no, not plain JavaScript. Sorry, it uses what it's called JSX, right? It's a more advanced JavaScript-based language that mixes HTML and JavaScript. Okay, so everything else is the same as you would expect. You can import stuff. What I have explained here. You can also import CSS, which is pretty cool. This is the equivalent of doing a link, right? Also, the JavaScript files, the extension is optional. That's what my IDE was failing to add the .js extension. It's optional. You don't have to, right? It's understood here that you're importing a function called app, right? That it's implemented in a file called app.js. And here is the equivalent, right? This is the interface, right, between the HTML world, which is declaring the div of ID root. It's what we did, right? It's what we did, right? We grabbed the root ID div, right? And then it's using React's library, right, to create a node. What the React does is that it creates a virtual version of the DOM, right? Reading and writing to the DOM is very expensive, right? From plain JavaScript, right? From JavaScript, what we're doing of writing to the DOM, the way we're doing it, it's extremely expensive and very, very slow, okay? So, for high performance web pages, right, you would not do what I'm doing. It's very expensive to do string concatenation and all that, right? So what React does, it tries to optimize that same idea. It tries to optimize it by creating a virtual DOM. It parses the DOM, right? And it creates an equivalent object in memory, in JavaScript memory, and tries to avoid having to go and manipulate the DOM at all costs. It does a minimum, I mean, at some point it does have to, right? At some point it needs to manipulate the DOM so that it renders on the screen. But it tries to do optimization in memory, right? It creates the DOM in memory, does all the manipulation of the DOM in memory, this virtual DOM, right? It's a much more compact representation of the document. And then when it's done doing the update, then it converts the virtual DOM into the real DOM, right? And then it renders. And that's done by this function, the render function, right? The render function is the one that takes the virtual version of the DOM and then converts it into the low-level DOM, okay? And also React.js, using this JSX syntax, right, that tries to blur the JavaScript world and the HTML world, tries to blend them in together, right? It allows you to treat JavaScript functions, as if they were HTML tags. This tag here, there is no such app tag, right? There is no such app tag. It's a function that I imported from some other file, right? And that function is returning HTML like we did, right? We are returning HTML, yes? So this thing that looks like a tag, basically what it's doing is that it's calling that function, and whatever that function returns, whatever HTML that function returns, it's being embedded right there. It's being replaced. See that? It's the equivalent, right? It's the equivalent of what we're doing here. See that? It's exactly the same equivalent. It's as if we could do this, have our own tag here, like that, right? And then have a parameter like active equal courses, something like that. See that? Wouldn't that be cool, right? That instead of using these weird curly brackets, right, and the $, blah blah blah, all those are string concatenations, right? What JSX allows you to do is now treat that function as if it were just like any other tag. You just made up a tag, right? And so that in that way, it's blending, right, functions that are implemented in JavaScript and being used as if they were tags, right, in HTML, right? Which is pretty cool, right? But that's next week when we start playing around with React.js. Okay. So that's what it is. This is what it is. This is a function, and here it is. So my function, for instance, is just returning hello world, right, and exporting it just like we just did. But with the improvement that this is no longer treated as a string. See, there are no quotes, right? And so this new syntax allows you to blend JavaScript, go back to HTML, then go back to JavaScript, right? And you can go vice versa, back and forth, right? Here you have JavaScript going to HTML. This app is going back to JavaScript and then back to HTML, right? So you can seamlessly use HTML and JavaScript together. Okay. Anyway, so what this asks you to do is to create components, right, for the various assignments, right? Assignment 3, the labs for assignment 3, right? And then let's start working with simple components that are just returning hello world, right? And notice that this function hello world, you're exporting it, and notice that indeed they're being reused as tags, right? So the function that you import, this tag looking thing is calling the function hello world, and whatever it returns, that's what gets rendered right there. And so anyway, so there's a whole bunch of labs for JavaScript, learning about JavaScript, where you're gonna learn about the DOM, right? The writing to the console, learning about variables and constants, right? So you're gonna create a whole bunch of little components, right? Practicing creating components that just do some simple calculations. You're gonna learn about variable types such as numbers or booleans or strings or objects and arrays, right? Learning about if statements and conditionals, if else. Also the ternary operator, which is very, very popular amongst React.js developers. Creating functions that do some simple arithmetics, right? And then some new syntax that is specific to the new version of JavaScript ES6, right? ECMAScript 6, which was introduced in 2015, and which in particular, the syntax of the arrow function, right? So up to this point, right, you declare functions like you would in any other language, right? The function, the name of the function, right? The ECMAScript 6 introduced the syntax of arrow functions, which is a much more compact version, right? That right, you don't use a keyword function anymore, right? You just use declare parameter lists and use the arrow, the equal, greater than, right? That declares what the body of the function, right? And then several syntax that simplifies the use of the arrow function. Like you don't need any returns, right? If it's the only thing you're returning, then you don't need to have the keyword return or the parentheses, right? If you only have one argument, you don't even need parentheses. So there was a lot of effort in the latest version of JavaScript to simplify the language, to make it much more compact, much more terse, right? And it's a joy to use, right? Then you have arrays. You're playing around with arrays. Removing stuff in the array, like adding stuff in the array or splicing them out. Looping over arrays, and the map function, which is one of the more popular functions, especially in React, right? And we just saw that we use the map function to iterate over an array, right? And then generate content, concatenate that content. So this one gives you a chance to practice some of those skills, right? And there's several other array related functions, such as finding elements in a function in an array, finding where it's what index, filtering, meaning only keeping a subset of the array elements, not all of them. You know, how do you filter them out? And template strength that allows you to embed expressions inside of strings, right? So you can compute very complex strength, which is exactly what we've done here, right? We were working with very long strings, right? Also, you learn about JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, that allows you to create arbitrarily complex data structures using curly brackets, properties and values, as well as embedded arrays, right? Also, the spreader operator that allows you to like copy content, complex data structures onto other data structures, right? It allows you to copy arrays, or copy entire objects onto other objects. Very, very cool. And then being able to extract, do the inverse, destruct, and retrieve elements from either an object or an array by their position. Okay. All right. Yeah, so I'm going to leave it here. I don't want to get too far into, so I'm going to leave it open for questions if you have the remainder of the session, the lecture. We're going to have a mini office hours if you have questions on your homework or something. Anybody have a question?